morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to this special presentation of our Conversation That Matters series. We're hosted by me, Mark Davenport, and the real impetus leading these efforts, Heidi Hernlein. Okay. And she's going to give you a few words now about how to fully show today.
Yeah, in case you are on YouTube watching live, then please go to the wisdomfactory.net/live-streaming. And there you will be directed to the event page of today, and there you can leave your comments and ask your questions.
All right. And with that short few words, we go to our guest, Martin Ucik, whose second book, Couples and Integral Relationships, Creating a Better World, has just come out.
Sex,
purpose,
and love.
I changed that. How come it didn't come up?
Because you were too shy to say that.
Oh, sex. Oh, okay. All right. So before I can tell any more lies about you, Martin, please say hello, okay?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Heidi and Mark, for all your work. You're really persistent in putting your message out there in the world. It's very impressive.
Well, you're very persistent.
You're one. Yeah, well, you're one of my model integral couples. So I'm very happy to be in this.
That's good.
Okay. Does that mean we still should buy the book? Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. We did. We've ordered the book.
It's like getting a flu shot. You know what I mean? You don't get a flu shot once you have the flu. You get it before you get it. So you want to get the book before you get into trouble with your relationship.
All cases, yeah.
All right. Happen. Well, I expect that many of our viewers already know about your first book, Integral Relationships, A Manual for Men. It came out in 2010, and it's already a classic in integral literature. As many women as men have read it. So I'm wondering, that's a hard act to follow. So what led you to write a second volume, Martin? Is it a follow-up, or is it go into brand new territory?
Yeah, well, it came from the humiliating experience when I found someone who wanted to co-create an integral relationship with me. And I thought, my first book provides me with all the tools. Sometimes I say it's called a manual for men, but if you take the N away, it's really saying it's a manual for me, right? So I wrote the first book, mainly a manual for me. And in 2010, after I had finished the first book, I was introduced to Andrew Cohen and others, and Steve McIntosh, to this whole evolutionary thinking, which wasn't in my first book. And so, when I met this woman, I already had this idea of what you have in your relationship of having a shared purpose, which I felt, and still feel that my purpose is to further the integral relationship vision. And so I expressed that verbally to her, and she said, yeah, that's what I want to do too. And, I feel as excited as you do. But then over time, it turned out that, she wanted to do that, but also many other things. And she wasn't really clear about her purpose. And eventually, that relationship ended. So I felt like this whole purpose idea is not really well thought through, right? Even not by the other purpose guides. I had some other ideas around shared purpose, because most purpose guides only work on helping people to discover their individual purpose. But there was, at least at the time, there are 2 books now out there that are also talking about shared purpose, but at the time there weren't. And so I felt, again, I need to learn more, because I usually only write what I need to learn and what I find interesting. And then I hope other people think they need to learn that too and find it interesting. So that was one part, which is the purpose part of the book. And then another mistake I had made, and which was humiliating, was that I don't know, I never had heard anyone else say love is unconditional relationships or not, even though I later saw it in other books used. And so I really, in technical terms, it's called the myth of the given, right? Where we think a human experience or a human thought is absolutely true in every situation, right? Even though it's created by humans, it's sort of like an ultimate fact. And if we fall into something like that, Ken Wilber, uses that term. I forgot who coined it or originally, some philosopher called the myth of the given. So I thought, when you fall in love with a person or love a person, then that's sort of like an unconditional fact. And all you need to do then, quote unquote, is use the integral relationship model to meet that person at his or her level, and then he'll learn and grow and awaken together and serve your higher purpose. And then I realized that even though the experience of unconditional love in the now, in the moment, right, when we're fully connected with our experience and we have that experience that we love, it can be nature, another person, an animal, anything that comes into our awareness, right, we're one with it. There is this sense of unconditional love for what is, right? But, we're usually not 24/7 in this full present now, right? So we're snapping out and we interpret our experience of unconditional love, just as we interpret an experience of awakening or satori or, even a painful, right? Our mind cannot help to interpret the experience of unconditional love. And that interpretation of that experience is, of course, conditioned by your altitude or your cosmic address. And so I had to backpedal on this idea of, love is unconditional, and then you use the integral relationship model and everything is fine, and say people also have different capacities to love, or at least they interpret this experience of unconditional love differently. And that opened a whole can of worms then, of course, because I had to look at how do people at different levels of consciousness interpret their experience of unconditional love, and how does it translate, from the upper left individual experience into the upper quadrants. And so I ended up creating this rather complex model, even though for me very exciting, where we look at unconditional love at the level of each chakra, and then at each chakra through the 4 quadrants and the feminine masculine polarity. So you get 7 times 4 times 4 perspectives of that experience of love. And then the sex part, just to give an overview of the book, is just, it's of course about sexuality, but also sex as a noun, where I summarized the integral relationship book in the first part, the sex part, and I added a few things to it. One thing that I overlooked in the first book, which was also quite important not to overlook, was pathologies. Because one insight I had was that the more evolved people get in consciousness, the more complexity they can hold in their mind, and the more experiences they kind of long for, right? I mean, we want to have someone who's very experienced and very complex in their personality. We find other people to be rather boring. But what happens is that, I mainly experienced that in myself, and also learned it through other males. But I'm sure it's true for women too, that are very often attracted to people who have some personality disorders, because these people are usually very, Princess Diana, for example, was a borderline personality, or Marilyn Monroe, or a lot of actually quite famous people. Donald Trump, for example, has a histrionic personality disorder. So they're very complex, colorful, often sexually very attractive people who read a lot of books on psychology and spirituality. They're often these relationship junkies, right? Who workshop junkies, right? So we initially find these people seductive and very interesting because they have all these different relationship experiences and these colorful lives, and they're really interesting, and they challenge us or me in a way, right? But then after a while, as we know, these relationships turn into one-way streets, and these people with the personality disorder expect the caregiver or the empath, right, to give them more and more attention, up to the point where all the attention basically is expected to go to the other person. While at the beginning, it's almost the opposite way, that all the attention comes from the person with the personality disorder to the empath, right? So that they hook the other person, and then the game changes. So I didn't see that in the first book. So that I added that to the sex part of Sex, Purpose, Love. Mm-hmm. And then I also added Enneagram Instincts, which Patricia Albert turned me on to, which are sometimes called subtypes, but that's the wrong term. So that's the social type, the sexual type, and the what's the third one? I'm getting old.
Social, sexual, and
counter
self-preservation, self-preservation type.
Self-preservation, yeah.
Right. And also expanded from the concept of interbeing, where the first book ended, to the concept of interbecoming, right? That you not only love your partner for who or she or he is, but also for the potential of your becoming together, right? Which I call interbecoming. So there are some additions to the sex, to the integral relationship part, and so that's why the book, you haven't received it yet, but it's over 800 pages, and it's a fat book, and but it has a lot of images. I just posted all the images on my website yesterday.
Yes, so I just saw those today. Mm-hmm.
There is 136 images, so that also gives people who are not sure or don't want to read a big book at least some bullet points to look at and to see what I developed. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was my long monologue about the merits of the book.
Well, with that monologue, I see why you needed 800 pages. It gets very complicated there, because we are complex creatures, and then throwing a couple of us together, all kinds of possibilities are there. It's an absolute miracle, that we learn how to stay together. Yeah.
And it's frustrating that more and more people no longer know how to be intimately together with one other person. Right now, that's sort of like the mythic rules have fallen away. A lot of people even think it's impossible and it's better to be by yourself.
Exactly, because I wanted to say the question is if we ever knew how to be together in a way that fosters all participants in the setting, because before there were just the rules, as Tom Habib points out. We had a conversation with him. When you have a relationship which is grounded in rules, this is fine, but you are not yet you in the relationship. So I think we are in the period where we don't want to play these roles anymore, but we don't know how to be ourselves and how to be in a relationship where we can be ourselves. First of all, we have to figure out who we really are, and this is difficult enough. And then how to be with somebody who is figuring out the same thing for themselves. So there's all possibilities of confusion, I would say.
That's something where I think I'm much more forgiving now, or that it is. I'm just reading a book called The Contradictions of Love about feminism, and she basically suggests, it's a PhD level Swedish woman, that women have to withdraw from men and connect with other women. So like the feminine power kind of like idea in a way, and to end patriarchy. And I mean, that makes in a way a sense, because if you want to get to interdependence and interbeing, you have to become independent first. And if we look at the anima-animus complex, right, which I describe in my first and in the second book, there is this fourth stage for women to as you say, Heidi, you know, to come into their own power and into their own authority. You know, and this is what this woman, Lena Gunnarsson, basically says, that women are so dependent. I mean, the old type of woman, or the mythic type of woman, is so dependent on the love of man, right? That then she becomes basically a slave, right, to the man, or a slave to her need for love, to receive that from men.
And also her need of support and her need of having somebody around, you know, and
take care of her and safety and things.
Yeah,
sure.
Right. And so that's an important phase, but the frustrating thing for me always is, you know, when people declare something as the ultimate final stage, right? And if you declare female independence from males and no longer needing males and not wanting to be in a relationship, that is where it becomes problematic. You know, just if people say awakening to be in the now and fully present is the final stage of spirituality, right? We now know that there's evolutionary enlightenment, evolutionary spirituality, so it never ends. And so that is sort of like the frustrating part, where people don't, you know, what Ken Wilber showed with this ladder, right, where or the conveyor belt, right, where he said, you know, mythic religions pick up egocentric people and take it, you know, to the mythic stage, but then they can go any further, and then, you know, the people get dropped off the conveyor belt and get onto the rational conveyor belt, which takes people to the rational stage, and then, right, and so these conveyor belts, of course, don't end at one point where people can say, okay, now I'm at the top.
Yeah.
But the people who provide basically one section of that conveyor belt chain, they usually don't see the higher conveyor belts and declare their conveyor belt basically as the ultimate highest one, right? And that is problematic.
It's absolutely problematic.
Oh,
but
my.
when you look back in your own history, we every time thought that too, and we need to be a little bit how to say, forgiving, but at the same time, contain the damage which those absolutistic ideas can create, and they do create a lot of damage. So I wrote just today a blog post about patriarchy and how it is accused of everything, you know, and it's just not right.
Well,
so hopefully we all grow up into more how do you say, complexive, integrative ways of thinking, and don't believe anymore that there is only one right thing and only
one wrong thing.
Solution. So what is your solution for integral couples?
Well, I mean, I you know, again, in the middle, and sometimes I wonder if I should have sorted the book in a different way, right? Is the purpose word is in the middle. And I think, you know, to get us out of what we call patriarchy and or have us move forward, is that more people awaken what I call their transcendental purpose. It's really interesting that each stage of development has coined a different word for purpose. Right, there's unique purpose and soul's purpose and God's purpose and higher purpose and true purpose and authentic purpose and evolutionary purpose. Right, they're all talking about purpose, but they have a different word before it, and you can somehow sort, right, that into stages. Have you ever noticed that all the purpose books have like another word in front of it? And
well, they're presupposing their own idea of what purpose is.
I noticed it, but I cannot now give an order, a connection to what level of development they.
And we don't want to put people into boxes, but I looked at about 20 purpose books, and I reviewed some of them or integrated some of them into my book. And the best-selling book is, again, my mind is a little, always comes back later. Anyway, so 32 million, so basically your purpose is to live God's purpose, right? You don't have your own purpose. Your purpose is the purpose-driven life is the title of it.
Oh yes, yeah. Well,
it's by a pastor here from California. Anyway, So we don't need to assign the words, but there's clearly books who, you know, put sort of like boost the ego and said you're already perfect as you are, and your purpose is just to shine your egocentric self into the world, right? And
Here
there's
I
people
am.
who promote God's purpose, and there is books that take a relatively rational approach, like Tim Kelly, like the True Purpose. And then you have Soul's Purpose, you know, the Bill Plotkin type people who say we have this soul, and, you know, the soul wants to express itself. And then you have the evolutionary people, and you have Andrew Cohen with his authentic, you know, evolutionary enlightenment, and so on and so forth. And anyway, I'm babbling here. So I call it transcendental purpose, just not to use any of these other words. And the interesting thing,
What do you mean with that?
Fair
transcendental? Yeah, fair question. So in my research, what I found out, which really blew my mind, was that they now found 4 genes for genetic predispositions, you know, that predispose us for talent, they call it. And that's either cognitive intelligence or empathy or creativity, artistic creativity, or kinesthetic or functionality abilities. And so these are 4, and then I went like, holy shit, they perfectly map onto the 4 quadrants, right? You have basically the good, the true, the beautiful, and then the lower right, the functional.
Yeah.
Right? And then I thought, so why did they get genetically encoded? Well, of course, they can only get genetically encoded through the sexual selection process. Right? That's how genetically things get encoded. And then I thought about all the thousands of dating profiles that I read. And what women typically want in a man is that he's intelligent, that he's kind or empathetic, that he's creative, make her laugh, right? Has some artistic talent, and they can fix things around the house, right? Besides, of course, physical attributes, right? So, and I asked numerous or many people and said, can you think anything outside of that, what in deep essence, right, a woman would want in a man or rewards in a man? And it's really reduced to these 4 qualities. So any sub-quality, right, would fall into one of these qualities. And I went like, wow, this is how, you know, Plato, and since Plato, people kind of recognize that humans are moving towards creating, you know, more truth, more beauty, more artistic things, or more, more goodness, sorry, and then more function. And that was because women, you know, rewarded these or didn't reward these things in males. And so I call it transcendental purpose, because this is already embedded inside of us before we even, I mean, it's on conception, right? Our genetic material is basically there, and it doesn't change very much, if at all. And so it develops way before our self-conscious mind develops, you know. And I outline in the book basically from the first common ancestor 3.5 billion years ago through history, then humans emerged. Then the sexual selection process for 200, 300,000 years emerged. And now everybody has embedded in them different strengths. So they're not equal, right, for either cognitive intelligence or some artistic intelligence or empathy or some kinesthetic intelligence. And then through learning and, you know, how we grow up, these talents get either furthered or promoted, right, or nurtured and developed through skill development, or they get repressed. And so, you know, there's many examples where musicians, you know, like even me, my father wanted not me to practice music and not play music. And, you know, he wanted me to go in the direction of intelligence, cognitive intelligence, but I wanted to be a chef and cook and make music. And so initially that talent was not really furthered. Now you compare it with Mozart, right, whose father wanted his son to be a musician. And of course, he had 10 times more genetic talent than I probably had, you know, for being a musician. And so his talent was furthered. And so that's why I call it transcendental purpose, because it's really beyond, so like our cognitive mind, but we can feel it down to our genes, down to our cells, what our talents are.
This is
And
interesting.
It is
so,
interesting.
and so it's not a soul, right? I mean, you could then call that your soul, or you can call it whatever you want, right? But ultimately, science now shows us that talent is nothing metaphysical, or purpose isn't even something metaphysical. It's something genetic and something psychological and biological and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
And so to come back to your, I guess, to your question is that, and I know you have a question mark, is that my grand vision in a way is that we move away from our old sexual selection process, that is basically based on our primary fantasies, right, of the successful, of course, men who are very artistic or very intelligent or very kinesthetically able or very empathetic are usually also much more successful in society, and women select them. But that, women have the same genes and have the same potentials to develop these talents that male have. I mean, modern and postmodern women at least. And that couples like you do select each other based on their shared transcendental purpose, and then take equal rights and responsibilities in enacting or living that purpose. And I think that's really something that happened throughout history, but very, very little, right? So we had sort of like these power couples throughout history, but it was more a novelty or rare, right? And now we live in a time where this is a potential, where fully actualized in independent males and females first get in touch with what their purpose is, their transcendental purpose, and then find someone to share that purpose with, just as you do.
Mm-hmm.
And that would, of course, then end patriarchy, because both males and females, assume equal rights and responsibilities in the private and in the public sphere, right? Where traditionally, or still, males have most of the responsibilities and therefore most of the rights in the public sphere, and women have more rights and responsibilities, at least in a traditional sense, in the private sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a really hopeful thing, right? That we can emerge into this new way of co-creating relationships, which a lot of people already do, right? I'm not saying there aren't any role models. We just need way more of them.
Okay. Well, you may have answered my question already, because you kept going a while there. But it seems like I see more and more evidence that women actually do the choosing in the relationship. They're the ones who say yes or no.
Of course.
More or less. Mm-hmm. Of course, you say. I don't know if that's particularly obvious to most people, though. And if that's true, then how do these four qualities, get expressed in women? We talked about how they're expressed in men more.
Yeah, and I wanted to add what do men want from women?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, of course, traditionally, men compete for sexually attractive women who have the potential to bear healthy children, right? That's in our DNA. It's genetically encoded. We can't help it. Of course, now with the Me Too and all the sexual harassment things, we see sort of like the unhealthy expressions of that. But generally speaking, there is usually healthy expressions around that. And then women can pick from the men who compete for them, and they usually then choose a sexual partner. Or now in modernity, a lot of women say there is no more good men out there, so they don't choose, because they don't want the men who compete for them. And the man that they want, they don't compete for them. And so some women now also are competing for men, right? But it's always based on what I call the primary sexual fantasy, right? My beauty, my sexuality for your success and your wealth and whatnot. And so what shifts when you live your transcendental purpose is that there isn't really like this competition or this choosing any longer in the traditional sense, because who you're attracting, what you're choosing, is someone who shows up in the world in a similar way, expressing, whatever you want to save sea turtles, or you want to solve global warming, or work with the poor, or I give there's thousands and thousands of expressions of your transcendental purpose, right? How you show up in the world, either creating more truth, in a scientific sense, creating more goodness in a moral or ethical sense, creating more beauty in an artistic sense, or creating more functionality. And so if you go to a meeting right around creating better bike paths in Los Angeles, for example, right, there might be a member of the opposite sex, or if you're same sex, gay or lesbian, right, who also shares this passion around creating better bike paths in Los Angeles, right, which would be function or functionality. And then you go like, wow, this is your interest too. And then you start talking and you realize you have different approaches and you have different ideas. And you go like, wow, if we have the same passion, bike paths in Los Angeles, but we have different approaches, how that can be realized. And if we combine our approaches, we create synergy. And then my vision of these people are both single and age compatible and have certain similarities in lifestyles and level of consciousness. This passion for bike paths in Los Angeles becomes an additional attractor that is then mutual, right? There is not one person competing for the other, but they're just streaming together like two streams, two rivers, and there's not one river competing for the other river, but they just combine their transcendental purpose. And Barbara Marx Hubbard calls that suprasexuality, and I agree with her. This is almost, or can be more attractive than pure physical sexual attraction. Sure. Right? Mm-hmm. This combined passion, right, that you feel, which I call your transcendental purpose. Okay. And so the more you show up in the world expressing your transcendental purpose, right, like I do through my book and talking with you and things, the more likely it is that somebody will be attracted to that and said, oh yeah, I also wrote a book about relationships, and I'm also passionate about, people identifying their purpose and things like that. And I guess I want to hang out with this Martin guy. And then, something organically emerges out of that, and not how it was in my previous relationship where this woman got to know me through my work and then kind of thought, oh, that's what I want to do, and I'm going to latch onto this guy, right? And maybe that's, but then it turned out, right, it wasn't what she really wanted to do because it was not authentic. She just, that would be like, oh, you're so into creating bike paths, and I never thought about that. I find you interesting, so I'm kind of pretending that my passion is to create better bike paths in LA because I have the hots for you, right? So that would be not good.
This would be the old way of how we are doing,
That would be the old way of doing it. Yeah, you're this great artist, and I also dabbled around a little bit, and so I'm latching onto you, and then maybe, So this is very important. What I say in the book is that the authentic transcendental or the transcendental purpose has already have to have manifested when you meet the other person, and not just then become something you want to do because you want to be with this other person.
Yeah.
And so that's basically the first step, is that we identify our transcendental purpose, then live it in the world, and then attract someone who shares that purpose, and then become equal co-creators. And that solves the question of patriarchy. It solves the problem of who's competing for whom. It solves so many problems, including the fourth part of the book is creating a better world, right? That we're obviously, so anyway, it's really important to see that not everything in the world is getting worse. So I have two lists in the book. Hope I can find them real quick. One is that shows the things that are getting worse, and the other list shows the things that are getting better. And so I don't know if you can see that, but the long list is the things that are getting better.
Oh, good.
And then the short list is the things that are getting worse.
Okay.
But the tricky thing is that the things that are getting better are addressed by the mythic and by the orange stage. So better education, more women in the public sphere, more doctors, less diseases and things like that. So everything that rational and mythic is addressing, these things are improving in the world and are potentially improving over the next, in the future. But they also create problems like global warming, for example, and inequality and things like that, that typically the green, right, the pluralistic stage and the integral stage are solving. And so these things are getting worse because there's not enough people in these, beyond the rational stage to really have an impact, a major impact on solving the problems. Mm-hmm. And so that is partly based, in the root, it's based in our sexual selection process. So what kind of behavior do females reward in males? And also the other big thesis in my book is that since the more evolved people become, the less they procreate, and people who are less evolved procreate more, right? We're basically getting outvoted and outnumbered by people at earlier levels of development. And so this idea, and I think Ken now more or less agrees with me around that the next higher stage always solves the problem of the previous stage, right? It's Habermas. And the problems at the higher stages always increase in complexity. That was basically true until the rational stage, because then people had more children, they survived, had higher survival rates, and so eventually the people in the rational stage more or less outnumbered everyone in the earlier stages. But now the people in higher stages, in the green and integral, pluralistic and integral and higher stages, they procreate so little, right, that there's just not enough people to outnumber the people in the earlier stages.
Yeah, but so we live forever.
And so the only solution is that people at all levels, right, the egocentric, the mythic, the rational, the pluralistic, awaken to their transcendental purpose to create more goodness, truth, beauty, and functionality, right? Because that's really the only way I think we can address the major challenges that humanity is facing.
Mm-hmm. The question is if we want to do that.
Pardon?
And this is, we have good ideas. We can.
Can you say that again? My microphone was low. My headphone was low.
Okay. The question is if we want to do that in all stages. If a red warrior stage person is really want to do more beauty in the world, no, why would they? Or more truth. Their way of doing is manipulating. Or even you were talking about more women in the public sphere, and now there comes this equity movement that we have 50%. A huge list I saw about professions where there are very few women, like truck drivers and things like that. Do we women really want to do that? To be equal to men? Oh no, come on.
No.
That's interesting. That's a little side point, is that the more liberal, countries are, the more freedom women have. Like in the Scandinavian countries, the more they go back into traditional female roles.
That's interesting.
There's very solid study around that. In emerging countries, a lot of women go into the male world because they just see that they have more status and make more money. But when that is no longer really an issue and they have the total freedom to choose, they go back to more into the traditional female roles.
Yeah, and not because they are traditional. That's not because they are traditional, because they are more akin to what our nature is. We are just more caring. We don't care so much about thinking out in the last little bit technological stuff, or the car. Somebody else can do the car, I don't have to know all about the motor.
Well, is always difficult, right? I mean, there is, of course, women who are very talented and very interested in engineering and things like that, and then that's fine.
50%, that's the thing.
But I would argue a little bit about that, as soon as people start to create more goodness, truth, beauty, or function, at one point in humanity, there were only magical and egocentric people, and they still created more goodness, truth, beauty, and function. It was just like very limited for themselves or for really people of their tribe, or who were really close to them. And then the higher you get in consciousness, the larger your circle of influence becomes, in a way. So I would argue that we need to rethink this whole idea that only people at higher levels can sort of like, create goodness, truth, beauty, and function. Once people awaken to their transcendental purpose, A, that awakening can happen at every level of development, and B, it will then create, more good, true, beauty, and function. It's just the impact that creation has, will be different when you express it from an egocentric level or from a mythic level or from an orange rational level and so on and so forth.
Also
But in the entirety, it could create that necessary shift to move humanity forward into a better future. Because I'm not a fatalist. I'm just saying, if we continue exactly on the track that we are on right now, right, that will not be sustainable. But already Plato and other philosophers throughout history were very negative about the future of humanity, and there was always some new emergence that then solved the problems. The only difference that we have now, and this is very, very important, is that about 45 or 50 years ago in the 70s, we became the first species and also the first humans who figured out to have sex without getting pregnant.
Yeah.
And if we look back in 100,000 years at human history, that will probably be seen as the biggest fulcrum in human evolution. By necessity. I mean, it is just like so obvious if you take a perspective of 200,000 years back and 200,000 years in the future. This is really so like the shifting point where sexual selection and the consequence of having intercourse, not being offspring, changed. And in other animal, let's say any other animal, we would observe as humans that would figure out how to have sex without getting pregnant. We would go like, holy cow, they will most likely be extinguished in a few generations, right? But we humans are not yet concerned about, even though there is more and more people getting concerned about, by seeing that the people in the Northern Hemispheres, all these societies are shrinking in size unless there is immigration. And only in parts of Africa and Asia and South America are societies growing through procreation. And so and of course people get older and older. And so the other thing that I'm maintaining is that for the first time, and that will really last for quite some time, is that we see a downshift in the center of gravity of where most people are in the developmental scale. So we moved more and more societies into a rational level of consciousness, and now we're seeing that societies are sliding back, where most people in the societies are in a mythic stage of consciousness. And the main reason for that is that people in the mythic stage procreate way more than the people in the rational stage. I was just in Israel a few weeks ago, and on the plane and then on the train, and then my daughter's friends and things, they were all non-religious Jews, I guess you called it, and they were all totally negative about the Orthodox Jews, and their main thing was like, they're having 7, 8 children, or over 5, between 5 and 10, and they said, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying what they said, they don't work, basically, they just raise their families. And then I asked them, well, how many children do you have, right, these modern Jews? And they either said none or 1 or 2. And so it's pretty obvious, right, that if that continues, that the Orthodox Jewish people, right, which is their right, I have no judgment, they will eventually outnumber and outvote then, the more Reformed people. And I think we will see that more and more in politics around the world, that we see these shifts. So and we can, of course, not force more evolved women now to have 5 or 10 children, right? It's not working that way. So the only way out of that is that we promote this idea of purpose, and that everybody that creates more good, truth, beauty, and function. And that's too much to argue now how that is really then, who decides what is good and what is true and what is beautiful and what is functional. And ultimately, again, in my idea, it's then decided by the co-creative couple, right, where the male and the female engage in, what I call empathetic, rational dialogue.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot of people saying that the way to get out of this hole is to educate women. That is basically to move them out of mythic into rational, and then they will have fewer children. There's a big push.
I want to add something, because for us women, children was the amount of children you had without the means of control was a curse, for physical life, but also for everything else. So the having children has become denigrated, has become something, something very negative. And I think we need also to overcome that. I personally don't have children, and mainly because of that, because it was a threat to me, having children. Oh, no. So we need to, the more educated women, why not give value to have children? And to have the purpose to educate children in a way that they become full human beings.
Yeah.
This can be a very good purpose. Instead, we think we have to become engineers, or I don't know what. No.
Again, the statistics are interesting. This is the most highly educated people, like with doctorates and things like that, or women, they have more children than people who have, let's say, only a master's or something like that. But it's, of course, a very small number. And there's a big study that was done between Northwestern in Chicago and University of Bonn, where they found out that the more willing the male partner is to share the burden of child care, the more willing females are to have children. Sure. That is, of course, a problem in the traditional sexual selection process, because when men, make a lot of money and are powerful and have big careers, they usually work 50, 60, 70 hours a week, right? And so the women on one level a lot of women want these successful, powerful men as partners, but then, at the same time, they would want them to share in the household work. So again, if the sexual selection process shifts to shared purpose, right, where then there is also more potential that that women are then more willing to live what I call their biological purpose. So as a little side note in the book, I differentiate now between what is our biological purpose, right, which is to survive and to procreate and all these things, like all other mammals or animals, and then humans have this transcendental purpose. And what I'm saying is that the transcendental purpose has to be in support of the biological purpose. So that's sort of like the normativity that I bring into this. Because in my talks, and this is something that really concerned me about all these purpose guides, they're essentially saying, like, follow some inner impulse, right? That feels really strong in you. Follow your bliss, or follow your, what you love to do and things like that. And whenever I heard that, I went like, well, the 9/11 terrorists or even the Nazis, they could say, this is what really deeply inside of us felt as our purpose, to do whatever we did, right? And so I was very skeptical, and I didn't even want to, I was struggling with that for months and months. I just didn't want to buy into that. And so my what is this, the normativity, right, where you give something that tells people that it is really their transcendental purpose, is two things. A, it has to be verifiably create more goodness, truth, beauty, or function. And then you can say, well, these terrorists, they didn't create any of these, right? So they're already disqualified, right? And the second thing is that it has to be in support of our biological purpose, which is also they didn't qualify. And the third criteria is that you have to have, at least in a coupled relationship, consensus, right? That your expression is really creating more good, truth, beauty, or function.
Okay.
So does that make sense? So we need these checks and balances in place, that not everybody just goes out and says, well, I feel strongly about, killing all Jews, and that's my transcend, or my whatever purpose, right? My calling, my purpose, and I'm just going to do it because my spiritual teacher told me to just follow whatever I feel called to. Right? That there needs to be a verification.
Just a side note to 9/11, there were no terrorists. So that's very much proof of that.
But whoever was behind it didn't create more.
But the other terrorists who just go and shoot somebody, that's for sure is no purpose, transcendental purpose when you kill somebody on purpose, Just the example was not the right one, in my opinion.
Okay, but you mentioned biological purpose, and of course with women, that is to have children. Now, how do we apply biological purpose to men in some comparable way?
Well, the biological purpose for men is to protect and to provide for women, specifically when they're pregnant and when they have children, young children.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And of course,
I wanted to hear it.
Yeah. That's why I'm also a big proponent of monogamy, and I'm not buying into these whole ideas of non-monogamy and stuff. That's just like in the animal world. There's reasons why that is, but we're also not eating as much sugar and salt and fat as we can every day for times when we're starving for weeks or months, right? So we moderate our food obsession. Well, most people
are, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Right. So anyway, that's just like one example that it also makes sense to moderate our promiscuity, or that males moderate their promiscuity.
No, so. And at the end, it's to the detriment of the women and especially to the children, because children who have to grow up with only one parent not only have only one parent, but they have only one quality of parent. They
kind of parent.
The more the feminine energy, which is more protective, which is more, while the masculine energy, and normally are women who are educating alone their children, and normally not the men. Masculine energy is more encouraging. Go out, do something, And we need both of that. We need the protection, but we need also the encouragement, the empowerment, let's say. And women normally don't do that. Normally they keep you all
devouring mother.
Sort of, yeah. So it's very important.
By and large, there's basically the woman who want the traditional relationship, right? Who long for a strong, powerful, successful males. And then you have the independent women who go the feminine or feminist or women who think there are no more good men out there, and they go it alone. And what my intention with this new book specifically is to show, so like the next level, the next emergence.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And I learned something very important from Bruce Kunkel, is that if you want to change the behavior in people, or there's probably many people who would agree with that, including the non-violent communication guy, what's his name? Marshall Rosenberg.
Yeah.
That if you want to change the behavior in people, you have to offer them something that's more attractive than what they have now, right? And so just telling people, well, learn about the integral relationship model and have children and be monogamous, people are not doing it on their own. So why would they do it just because I tell them, right? That's a ridiculous idea. But I think what makes sense is and there are so many purpose guides out there right now, right, that I'm sort of like riding on or riding the wave, is you have a transcendental purpose, right? And what you do right now that feels unfulfilling and unrewarding and somewhat, is not really what you're meant to do. And so that is something that's attractive to people as a first step. And then to say, once you live your transcendental or authentic or God's or whatever purpose, your soul's purpose, then find a partner to share that with. That usually lights people up, and they go like, oh my God, that would be way more exciting than serial monogamy or being single or being polyamorous or something like that. And I mean, I've seen it now hundreds of times when talking to people, that people, and you already shared that, right? So there's, of course, the single people in groups who go like, who resonate with that, and specifically those who already feel that they're living their purpose. Then other people go like, well, yeah, I mean, it will take a while change my life and to live my purpose. The people who are in relationships and don't have a shared purpose and really realize that their relationship is somewhat on the rocks or not as fulfilling as they think it could be, they're of course now thrown into this dilemma of saying, yeah, holy shit, I'm on the verge of living my purpose, and somehow I expect my partner to support me in living my purpose, but he's doing other stuff, right? Because it's not his or her purpose. And now they're in this like, shit, what do I do, right? Do we end the relationship, or can I help my partner discover his transcendental purpose? And then it's a trick question, or a tricky question for her. And I'm afraid that I don't have real evidence, but I definitely noticed when people left the talks that I gave in New York and in Munich and Zurich and Vienna, that there were some people who got really thrown into this conflict, or maybe they already feel drawn to another person who shares their purpose, but they're both, in different relationships, and should they now both end their relationships? And so it opens potentially a lot of conflicts in people who get excited about this idea, as I am, about sharing a purpose with a partner.
So what would you recommend? I mean, I say what I would say, that it is more important to really live your true self and your truth, adhering to a commitment which you have done maybe 30 years ago or something. That doesn't mean that when you leave your partner that you trash him or her, that you can keep a friendship. But probably I would say that it's the good thing to be with a person. Maybe not live every day, but be with a person who is really sharing your purpose. I've learned a new word.
Well, that reminds me of something that's been nagging me a little bit during the show, is that we met 6 years ago, A big chunk of the attraction we felt was both being interested in Ken Wilber and integral thought and so forth. And that's kind of become background noise in our life now. And of course, our interests go in other directions as well.
Yeah, but we have a lot of common interests. We watch together videos from talks which people give or things like that, and we're very much interested.
But it's very much an ongoing evolution.
Yeah,
we have to continue to talk to each other and to share these things. Go off in separate directions.
Yeah, and we don't. I mean, we have enough to talk about.
God, yes.
Well, that's a really good sign in my book. I would say, that decision, to separate really depends on the life. If you have young children and, and things like that, that's a different situation than if you're single and if you're a couple, but you're not very enmeshed, right? You don't have children together, you're not financially enmeshed and things like that. And also, what is the health of the relationship otherwise? So I think that's really a choice, and an individual choice, and there is no general guideline, right, to say.
Yeah. Would you recommend in these cases that you have your primary relationship, but you have a deep friendship with somebody with whom you share the purpose? Whatever you call that.
I mean, that's one possibility that I propose in the book.
Okay.
But that, of course, can be very challenging for the partner who is not in that shared. It's sort of like a certain form of polyamory, right? Which is you have one person that you live your biological purpose with, ideally, and then you have another person you live your transcendental purpose with. And that I met a couple in Vienna who say, we do that for 30 years. We're married to different people, but we share this passion for moving the integral vision forward. And they looked at each other, and I don't know what was happening there, but there was definitely some kind of shift happening in them, during my presentation. So sometimes sort of feel a little bit conflicted, right? Because it's it can throw people into some real existential conflicts. To realize biological purpose and transcendental purpose, and if they're not the same, and they're in a coupled relationship, what do I do now?
But we grow with conflicts and with difficulties and challenges. Otherwise, we stay the same. So if we have the main purpose, the main goal to grow up in our lives, with a full life, we probably don't have to avoid, should not avoid conflict.
Yes. Okay.
I wanted to say we are at the top of the hour. We theoretically have to stop here, but I want to tell people, when you read this, wisdomfactory.net, then /Martin-Ucik-new-book, and there you find it. You can click on it and you go directly there. You find the new one, and you find also the old one, the older one. So, and you find all the information, how you can get into contact with Martin, and about sign up for his newsletter. He's in not all over the world, but big chunks of the world. He is having workshops and talks, and I think it's a very interesting thing to wrap your head and your mind and your feelings around. So
and my website is integralrelationship.com.
I hope I got it right this time in the website. I will check it.
Okay. And gee, I just thought, as we were talking, that we've gone through 85 or 90% of this stuff, so we only have to read the last 100 pages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lucky
and
you.
then I want also to say to the viewers, we have done at least 2 or 3 other interviews with Martin Ucik. You will find them in the website and in the archive and in the YouTube channel. So.
Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Martin. This has been a really good hour. We got to listen. We didn't have to ask so many questions.
He talked all the time. We couldn't ask.
I was being polite. Come on. Okay.
Maybe that's a writer's disease, right? That if we finally get to talk, right, after being by ourselves for thousands of hours, right? So.
Well, we're awaiting the arrival of your book, and best of luck with it.
Also, I don't promise to read all 800 pages, but I will look for what I'm most interested in.
That's the beauty of the book, and we put in a lot of effort at the beginning to show people what is where, so that they can jump right to where the topics that interest them. Yeah. And it's about 350 pages of endnotes, right? So it's really not that big of a book if you take out the endnotes and take out all the images and the graphics. Plus, if you already have the integral part down, you don't need to. So we provided a really good roadmap, my editor and I, that you can read the parts that really pertain to you and that interest you.
He had women editors and illustrators. Wow.
I want to say Mark will write the timestamps for this conversation. So when you want to come back in a few days, you will find what we talked about and what minute of the conversation. But give him a...
come on.
Okay, thank you everybody for having watched.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
And
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.
Yep.
We'll meet again sometime.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Martin.
Bye-bye.